Hello and welcome everyone to today's panel, Identity Crisis, Navigating the Modern Data Organization. For those of you who don't know me, where have you been all day? I'm Jillian. I'm on the community team here at DBT Labs, and I will be both your host and panel moderator today as we spend the next 45 minutes, reminder to start my timer, getting intimate with our panelists who, much like all of us, have their own unique experiences evolving their identities at what often feels like the edge of chaos. The intention of this conversation is to create a safe space for all of us to see that we are not alone in this crisis, to feel connected in the deep loveliness of being surrounded by people that understand you. Just a reminder to join the conversation over in the Slack channel, Coalesce Modern Data Org Identity, where I would love to hear from more of the community about their unique identities and experiences over the course of their career. Before we jump into the dialogue, I need to steal about 5 minutes to introduce you to our panelists and share a bit of the behind the scenes of how this panel came together. I'm going to introduce you to each of them in the order that I came to know them over the course of the past few years. Okay, so first we have Barr Moses. Barr is the CEO and co-founder of Monte Carlo Data, a data observability and monitoring platform on a mission to bring an end to the infamous and all too familiar data downtime. Barr and I met back in 2019 when she was doing early research for Monte Carlo. While at the time I was over a decade into my own professional career, I had only been identifying as a data analyst for about 3. And here I have this entrepreneur seeking my insights for a product that she's bringing to market. I will forever remember Barr as the first founder to solicit my expertise, which was a leading indicator of what was to come. Okay, next we have Caitlin Mormon. Caitlin's the VP of Data Operations at Trove, a community leader and writer over in the locally optimistic community, which you are not a part of. I encourage you to check out. And so while I technically only met Caitlin in person this year, I've been reading her content since 2019. Her article on glue work in analytics really left an impression on me, and I can't tell you how many times that I've shared her article on career ladders in analytics. Okay, on to Stephanie Olafsdatter. Steph is the CEO and co-founder of Avo, a data planning and governance platform for product analytics. I met Steph earlier this year, shortly after joining DBT. We were both on a panel at Datafold's data quality meetup. As a CEO, Steph caught my eye and attention immediately during her lightning talk on the data purpose meeting. It was really refreshing to hear a founder speaking so resonantly about the importance of collaboration between data producers and data consumers. Finally, we have David Jayataleki, who is the Senior Director of Data at Lyst. David and I met this past summer while I was interviewing community members to learn more about their experiences introducing analytics engineering to their organizations. What struck me about David immediately was the similarity of our own modern data experiences. It was remarkable to learn how he introduced DBT at Lyst during a high-pressure migration from Redshift to Snowflake. This was something I had unsuccessfully campaigned for in my own organization, and it wasn't until after digging in with David, 4 years by due after my failed campaign, that I realized for the first time how much the organizational environment and one's role within it influences situations like these. Dave has a really great story and was just recently a guest on the Analytics Engineering podcast, which y'all should check out if you haven't. Okay, so those are our panelists. As promised, I want to bring you a bit behind the scenes of this panel coming together because it gives me an opportunity to share a bit more about my own grapples with identity and why having this conversation today has never felt more important. For those of you who don't know, I joined DBT Labs earlier this year as a developer relations advocate, a new role for me as somewhat of a former ops and analytics generalist. I'm used to being behind the scenes. Coalesce planning was already underway when I started, and it wasn't long before submissions were rolling in. I was already acquainted with Barr and Caitlin, who I knew from the locally optimistic community, and both of them submitted pitches for Coalesce that I absolutely loved. Right around the same time, I'd been waiting for the right opportunity to build a relationship with Steph and ask her to pitch at Coalesce. I'm not a stalker, I swear. But suddenly I see that Steph and some of her team from Avo have joined the DBT community Slack. So from there, Steph and I have a few inspiring conversations, and it's right during the same time that I'm meeting with David while doing research on speaking with champions about building the case for analytics engineering. So long story short, I'm coming into a completely new phase of my own professional identity, having to make some really tough decisions about final content to take the Coalesce agenda, which is Nothing I have ever been responsible for in my professional career. You could say I was freaking out. And I decided to just go for it. I meet with Barr and Molly Vorwick, who's the head of marketing at Monte Carlo. And I tell them how much I love Barr's identity pitch. And by the way, did you know that Caitlin Mormon had also submitted a great pitch on how we're all still trying to figure this out, and then data is still really hard. And oh, by the way, had she met Steph or David, because I also think they would be a great fit. I basically came in like a total freight train to this awesome panel that Barr had pitched. And to my absolute pleasure and delight, she loved the idea. And would you guess what? Liz was a customer of Monte Carlo. So yes, she did, of course, know David. So I tell Steph, and Molly helps me organize introductions with everyone. And here we are all today. So with that, I don't want to take up any more of my time storytelling. I'm going to hand it over to the panelists to kick us off. And I'm going to start by having each of them take 2 to 3 minutes to tell us what has been the biggest reinvention of your career and what did you learn from it? And Barr, I would love to start with you.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Jillian, thanks for recounting that. Oh, man, it feels like it was just a few years ago, and it feels like ages ago. And it actually has to do a lot with sort of my identity informing and my reinvention. So I'll take you all back to maybe my first identity reinvention, and then I'll come back to this one. I was born and raised in Israel. My dad is a physics professor, and I studied math and stats, and I was pretty sure I had to go be a stats professor as well. I would basically not be accepted at home if that wasn't the case. And so I studied math and stats, worked in the statistics department, and actually I was really bad at it, and I also hated my life. And I learned that after a few short months, which I'm happy about. It could have been longer. It was an amazing place, but just not for me. And so that was my very first fail my dad moment. I was like, it's happening. This is real. This is not my identity. It has to be something else. And made a hard pivot from being in academia to actually working with software companies and tech. And so that was the very first pivot. And I think throughout there, I've had lots of sort of pivots throughout, not always having a North Star of what I wanted to be when I grow up. That's actually a question that I'm pretty obsessed with. So almost everyone that I meet, I like to ask, what do you want to be when you grow up? And as someone who didn't have that North Star, I'm really curious to hear how other folks think about that. So for me personally, throughout my career, I've always optimized locally, if you will, which is fitting. Always at any given moment and sort of decision in time, always ask myself, what are the things that would make me happy and where I think it can make a ton of impact, and follow that path. And I have a lot of respect for folks who know, like, when I grow up, I know I want to be something, have some sort of title or achieve something. And reflecting on my career, it hasn't been like that. So actually, I want to make space for folks who are not always sure what they want to be when they grow up. It's okay. If you're on that journey with me, join me. We'll figure it out together. And then the other sort of reinvention, if you will, of my identity was just before I started Monte Carlo. So prior to Monte Carlo, I was VP operations at a company called Gainsight, where I was really fortunate to work with many companies that were on their path to becoming data-driven. And that journey was long and hard and complicated, and obviously had very different meanings just 5 years ago. But it was even harder. So I have a lot of respect for all data teams out there fighting the good fight to become data-driven. It's a worthwhile fight to do, but it's a hard one. When we started Monte Carlo, actually, before starting the company, I interviewed a couple hundred data organizations from all different walks of life, including Jillian, who I was very fortunate to get a little bit of her time telling me about her challenges. And I learned so much from that. I learned a lot about identities. I learned about the various roles. I think analytics engineer was up and coming then. We see a lot more of that today. It's definitely a newer thing. ML engineer didn't really exist back then. There are a lot of sort of new roles and identities. Data product manager, maybe one of my favorite new, if you will, if I'm sticking to titles for a little bit, that has changed a lot. But basically interviewed folks across the board and asked them, open-ended, what's keeping you up at night? What's the thing that sort of is the biggest pain for you? And actually that's how Monte Carlo was born. Monte Carlo today helps companies become data-driven by eliminating what we think is the biggest hurdle, which is data downtime. But that came out of the amalgamation of many identities that I've had the opportunity to meet. And I'm grateful for all of those for helping shape both who I am today and both what Monte Carlo is. So I'm very grateful for the community and for everyone who's been a part of that journey. Those, I would say, were a couple of the important reinventions of me and my identity.
Muting. Thank you, Barr. Caitlin, we'll pass it over to you and then to Steph and then to David. That way I don't have to jump in.
Awesome. Jillian, thank you so much for bringing this all together. This is super fun. So I'm Caitlin Mormon. I lead a data team at a startup called Trove Commerce now. But early in my career, I started out in private equity. So I was working for a growth stage private equity firm. We took majority stakes in companies, and I had this kind of jack of all trades role, which was really fun. Learned a lot. I did, due diligence, company strategy, FP&A, random consulting assignments like designing incentive compensation plans, whatever needed to be done. And I worked with data a lot, but when I needed data, I literally just emailed within the portfolio company and said, hey, can I have a CSV with these fields? Everyone's favorite request. It's like the best. And I was very data oriented, but like really had no idea what was happening upstream. And so after almost 6 years doing that, I decided I was ready to go work in a single company full time. And this was my big pivot, but it was really accidental. The Barr's comment about not having a North Star really resonates with me. I've never had a vision in mind. So I happened to take an analyst role at a software company that I thought would be more of kind of an FP&A role. So my first big project was building out a revenue projection model, my sweet spot, living in Excel, going to get really into this modeling exercise. And I get there on my first day and I learned that the first step is getting my own data. So we had no user-friendly tools or dashboards. We had a bunch of saved raw SQL queries that I had to learn how to run, modify, read, figure out what I needed. So I had this super steep learning curve. And then within a few months, I'm like automating, dropping CSVs into share folders so we can update these dashboards in Excel, like modifying PHP so that we can change what our daily revenue email includes. I got pretty deep really quickly. And for the first time, I started to consider myself a technical person, which was a really big identity shift for me. So I went from somebody who, like, I considered myself a math and econ person. I can analyze data, I can find the patterns, I can figure out what to do based on the patterns. But suddenly I started to feel like I could build new things, which was really empowering. And so then the role after that, I ran into actual modern data tools, Redshift, Matillion, Chartio. This is still a few years ago, eventually Looker, and I was off to the races. And that combination of being somebody who can find the insights in the data, but who can build the platform to empower the people to find the insights in the data has been a really powerful combination for me ever since then, and has allowed me to feel like I can really maximize my impact in a way I really couldn't before that shift. So that's, again, much like Barr, I've got a few of those kind of big pivots, but I think that's the biggest one and certainly the most relevant one to this audience. So Steph, I'll toss it your way.
Thank you, Caitlin. I also want to say hi, everyone. Thank you, Jillian, for bringing all of us together here. And I guess Barr as well for pitching this panel. And I'm really honored to be here among these cannons, I have to say. But okay, let's start with the light questions. What's been the biggest reinvention of your career? Easy. No, I'm kidding. That's a huge question. So I think, like Barr was talking through and Caitlin also covered, I've gone through a few shifts. And they probably started actually when I was very young, because I moved around a lot when I was a child. I had young parents, so I was raised by the families of those people, like my grandmothers and their siblings, my uncles and aunts, and we moved around a lot. I'd moved like 30 times when I was 16. And so I think that sort of I grew up in an environment where I was constantly identifying myself with the environment that I was in. So I really relate to what Barr was talking about. I was not didn't have a North Star I don't relate personally at all to, as a child, knowing what I want to be when I grow up and then just go on that trajectory. I'm always fascinated by that. And I think that takes a lot of probably self-discipline, not the route that I went into. I then also, like Barr, went and studied mathematics, but I did it with philosophy. So I studied a double major, and I think probably one of my first identity crises was just accepting the identity that I would not be a student anymore and be an employee somewhere. That was the first major shift, and it felt like such a big decision to decide like, where are you going to work, Steph? What are you going to do? And there was a lot of pull for mathematicians in the banking industry. Oh, they were always like treating us with some nice things and trying to get us to work there. And I was never, ever interested in that, and ended up applying for a few sort of Icelandic sort of more established startups that were like startups back in the 80s, but had grown into like bigger companies, but they were inventing something cool. And I went into a company that was in an academia path. It was a genetics company. I joined there as a statistician, but almost had an identity crisis in that company as well, because academic environments can be very chaotic. And for example, I had 5 bosses and there was no sort of synchronization between like them, like who was my boss. And if they would give me conflicting projects at any given point, and I'd come to them and be like, I think I have a conflict here about these 2 huge 6 months projects that are supposed to happen at the same time, they'd be like, this is an opportunity for you to learn how to say no, Steph. I was like, alrighty, okay, because I'm a grown up now. And then I would say a major turning point was going away from that academia path. I was on a PhD trajectory when a startup reached out and asked me to apply as the founding analyst. And I thought to myself, that PhD can wait. When do you get an opportunity to build a data team from scratch? And so I joined this mobile game called QuizUp, which had that then just reached 1 million users in its first week, which was the fastest growing app in the App Store at that time, back in 2013. And for anyone who's listening, this record was later beat by Flappy Bird. I don't know if anyone also remembers Flappy. So that sort of shift from just, I don't know, becoming like an internal researcher or a PhD or professor type of thing into all of a sudden like moving into this hugely fast moving world. And then I think the most recent one is the moment when I became a founder. I remember like I thought I knew what it meant to be a founder just from working close to a founder in a startup. And then I became a founder and little did I know. And I think that has also been a major identity shift for me. And obviously there's been like a bunch of ones along the path as well. And I'm sure we'll get to some of those along the topics of this panel. So over to you, David.
Steph. Thanks, Gillian and Barr, for having me on this panel. It's been fun. Yeah, so I think I've been through a few pivots as well, and I really identify with not having a North Star, or at least losing one. So when I left school, I thought I wanted to be an engineer, and I started off studying electrical engineering, and quickly realized this wasn't what I expected, didn't really enjoy it as much, and the only part I enjoyed was the math. Pivoted and started studying math, but again, losing my North Star, wanting to become an engineer, to studying maths for some general purpose that I had no idea about the future. And during my time at uni, I had an internship at a Big Four accounting firm, and it was in their tax advisory area, which I really enjoyed because it involved analysis and modeling, bags of money, really. And I thought, great, this sounds interesting. And I took them up on their graduate scheme into the same area. Once you join the graduate scheme, you end up doing a lot of audit, and that really wasn't for me. So pretty quickly changed again, realized what I really enjoyed about it was the analysis side. And that's how I ended up becoming an analyst at a company called Ocado, which is the UK's first online supermarket. And that was a really great place. And I had no idea that being an analyst involved using a database. I had encountered databases before at school, but didn't know that this would be, so first week, learn SQL, learn Excel, or more than I had already, and basically start doing analytics engineering using Excel and VBA and string manipulation in cells and things like that, rather than having DBT, which did not exist. And from there, I gradually progressed into doing more analyst work, and then specialized a bit towards pricing in a big payments company. And that, again, I ended up being quite niche and wanted to reinvent myself again and move back into mainstream data. And that's led to the track where I'm now, looking after analysts, analytics engineers, and data scientists.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing more about your backgrounds. One theme I think I heard come out of each and every one of you is that absence of a North Star coming into your careers, our careers, not exactly knowing where we were going and having an open mind and a sense of adaptability for what opportunities get put in front of us, which brings me to my next question, which is, lately I've been seeing the argument across the data Twitters and the Substacks that perhaps we should be focusing as an industry more on the jobs to be done within the analytics space as opposed to job titles. So I wanted to open up the conversation, and the question for you all is, what are the jobs to be done in analytics work, and who is in the best position to define them and execute on them?
So I see this as, I see this like a flow of data, and at the sort of companies I've worked at, you have applications which generate data, and that data has to go and live somewhere. So someone has to be building something to capture that data and store it safely and in a structured way. And then from there, that data has to be manipulated and made available to users, and then analysts can go, well, so that's a title. So other people have to take that data and present it in a way that derives information and recommendation. And I think that roughly translates into data engineers, analytics engineers, and analysts. Those are the roles that I see in that.
Yeah, I think that does a really good job capturing the general arc of jobs that have to be done. And I think we've always known that job titles are only a loose approximation of the job to be done. If you go look at 10 analyst job titles or 10 data engineer job titles, you're going to get 10 different roles. And I think in terms of defining it, it's really important for the leadership of the team to be really thoughtful about the work that needs to be done. In some organizations, there's much more on the collection end. There's much more kind of heavy, what we consider data engineering work. In some orgs, there's not as much of that. And so if there's not, is it a whole role? Is it something you want another person on the team to lean into because you can use off-the-shelf solutions? Like, it's less important what your title is and more that you've been really thoughtful about what work does need to be done, that you're hiring for that skill set and the right perspective for that job, and that the team you pull together can really bring that. And on some teams, that might look like 6 people with 6 different job titles. And on some teams, that might look like 6 people who are all called analytics engineers or data analysts. But they know their area of focus and they can play to their own strengths and lean into different pieces of that kind of more or less heavily. And then also communicating kind of the edges. So where do we, as a data team, overlap with the finance team? We need a revenue forecast for the year. Who owns what pieces of that? And are we sure that we're filling all of the gaps to make sure that all the jobs to be done are owned by someone, though there is no one whose job at most, I work in mostly startups. At most startups, there's no one whose job is financial model. You're bringing together a bunch of different people, and it's all about really focusing on the problem to be solved in your company and not insisting that you take someone else's job description and reiterate that across your challenges. You've really got to be thoughtful about what you need.
Thank you, Caitlin and David. Caitlin, I heard you mention earlier in your intro how you picked up your technical skills on the job. That's very similar to myself. And so this question I want to pose to Steph and Barr: if we think about technology as having the power to transform our identity, as a founder, transform our identities in the sense that we potentially as practitioners can take on new roles because of the evolution of the tools that we have, I'm wondering how this factors into how you think about bringing your product to market.
Yeah, I think it's such a good question and a very difficult one. I think when it comes to bringing the teams together or bringing a team together, I think Caitlin spoke very wisely about the different phases of a company and the different needs. I think there's sort of 3 fundamental questions to answer. First of all is, what problem are we trying to solve? That's the first fun. Let's figure out what is the problem when, what is the thing that we're after, right? What does success look like? The second thing that we need to ask ourselves is, where is this person's energy? Are they drawn to solving that problem? Are they excited about doing that? I think even if they don't have the skill set and they need to learn it on the job, it's way easier to do that if you're actually excited about doing it. So I think when we have that fit, and that's actually the third question, is there a fit between 1 and 2? So what's the problem that we're trying to solve? Is this person excited, and where is their energy, and is there a fit between 1 and 2? When these two things happen and come together, I think that's where the magic lies. And that's where things really the impossible can be done in those instances. So that's how I think a lot about team building. And I think there's a lot in flux in terms of what's the title, what the skill set, how do you add value, et cetera. All of those things actually figure themselves out when we have a strong match there. The second thing that to your other question around technology and what that means when you bring that to market, I actually when you were talking about this, I was remembering something that we had a conference in Monte Carlo a couple of months ago, time flies. And I was speaking with Bob Mulya, the former CEO of Snowflake. And he talked a lot about how actually a company's values, a company's DNA find themselves into the product, which I found so interesting that actually the values of a company, I'll just say it again, the values of a company are actually embedded in the product that the company brings to market. And that makes it even more important for us to be intentional about what these values are that we have for a company. We think about bias and everything that goes into actually building great. How do we make sure that our values as a company are the ones that we can stand behind? Because by definition, if they're going to be in the product, they're going to be in the hands of so many other people. And so actually, we're influencing so many other lives by building a product and then bringing it to market. And I thought that was such a powerful thing to say, and one that I carry with me today as well when I look at our product and how people actually use Monte Carlo.
Thank you, Barr. I really relate to the bringing the energy and the energy of the person together with the need of the role. That's a great identification. But we've gone all over, and there are so many things I want to talk about now because Caitlin and David and Barr have said so many great things. But your question was around if technology has the power to transform identities. We're talking about how I, as a founder, factor that into our go-to-market.
Yes, exactly. And maybe building off of what Barr was saying, I loved the way she spoke about your values, right? Bringing the company's values into the product. Maybe you can speak to that, Steph, if that's something.
Yeah, absolutely. So the backstory of what I'm doing today, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Avo today. And all of that comes from building the data culture at QuizUp. And I was hired in as the first analyst. And obviously, a lot of the first things that you have to do as the first analyst is what David was referring to earlier. It takes a lot of data engineering to be there, but it also takes a lot of sort of relationship building and driving cultural shifts. And I often talk about this journey that we went through at Avo, from being a data team of one into being like a centralized data team, into being a self-serve analytics organization, into being a self-serve analytics organization with some sort of a centralized governance for the analytics stack that we have, into being a really well operational product organization, which is empowered both with self-serve analytics and also with self-serve analytics governance, which is a strong and important backbone of self-serve analytics, in my opinion. And I think that journey of taking the company through all of those different stages, it required a lot of cultural shift, but also a lot of technological shift. Once QuizUp was acquired back in 2016, I think I was my energy from the data space was drained. I was I am never going to do anything in the data space again. That's never going to happen. And look at me now. But I took a break of 1.5 years and started another company, started writing a book about data and all those things, and then got pulled into other projects. And then in this new company, it took us 5 months to ship a product update with incorrect data. And all of a sudden I was just pulled back in and I felt my energy come back. So I was just I was so passionate about applying technology to make the cultural shift within all of those organizations. So I think from my perspective, there are two really important things that we're focusing on with Avo. We are helping people collaborate. We're helping product managers collaborate with product engineers and with data scientists or analytics engineers or data experts or data engineers or all of the different titles as we're talking about the identity crisis. We're helping those roles collaborate, and we're using technology to make that collaboration much easier. And I think that makes me very personally passionate about doing this. I'm applying technology to make the cultural shift within the product organizations.
This makes me very excited as a practitioner, and for all of the practitioners in our community, that we have thoughtful founders who are considering these values as they're introducing tools for practitioners to use. So to pivot back over into more practitioner direction, to Caitlin and David, I want to pose to you the question of, how have you observed identity, since we talk about jobs to be done and that titles don't matter, it's more about the problem you're trying to solve. But consider for a moment, as a practitioner, how does your identity influence your ability to be effective in your organization, in your organizational context? How do you see identity being critical there?
Yeah, I think identity can be very empowering or very self-limiting. You really need an expansive sense of who you are and what you can get done in order to actually get those things done. I think, like a lot of people who have been working in data for a long time, I started out feeling like I was just a data analyst. Like, oh, just an analyst. I don't know how to use Git.
Most important role. What are you talking about, Caitlin? Most important role.
And a lot of my career has been working in small organizations where there were a couple of us, and there wasn't necessarily a really clear role model of what does it look like when you've got someone who comes from being an analyst and actually takes a leadership role, not just a data team leadership role, but a company leadership role. What does that look like? How do you start to change things? And I think that's an identity that didn't come naturally to me. And I am not a person who has like consistently raised my hand to take on bigger and bigger roles, but I've been pulled sometimes against my will into bigger and bigger roles. I have actually had to have the talk. You can take this promotion or we're going to hire someone over you. So it's up to you what you want, which is one way to get someone to take a promotion. But it's really important to really see data as a role that can have huge impact on the success of a company. And in some places that's really obvious. You got the Stitch Fix model of a company built on data. And then you've got a lot of roles where you come into a company that doesn't see data that way, and you have to really build that path. And you need role models. And that's why I love the DVD community, the locally optimistic community, and seeing people out there who are doing that, where you can identify and say, oh, I'm that kind of data leader. That's who I want to be. And I am not the chief algorithms officer. I won't ever be. That's not me.
Who are you?
Lots of other identities that can still have impact.
I like to just say that I question things for a living. I find that like a simple identity.
Sorry to barge in there, but I just felt very passionate about that. As someone who, I think we've all been in some shape or form self-deprecating, if you will. And I actually think it is literally one of the most important roles in the company, and we need to give a voice to that.
Yeah, plus one. Sorry. Go ahead, David.
I was just going to say, I think identity is important in the data world, because where I came from when I entered it, there were really just two roles. You're either DBA or you're an analyst. And what that meant was that you ended up wearing many hats. And often, especially as an analyst, you'd end up doing what you'd now call analytics engineering, a bit of data engineering, a bit of data science. And because you didn't know what you were, you could often end up doing lots of things not very well. And I think if you knew, oh, this is the part that I really like doing, this is the part that I'm most comfortable with, and I think I can deliver the most value in, you could probably excel more. And I think that's one reason identity is important. And maybe not the role title, but just understanding that domain is your domain. Yeah, and then as Caitlin was saying, going into leadership, yeah, there's identity and leadership as well. So I've recently hired a director of data science. I do not know those algorithms and the mathematics behind them enough to be that director of data science, but I can be a more general data leader for a company.
Yeah, that idea of specialization, I think we all saw it across the industry when the job title analytics engineer blew up, and everyone had this moment of, oh, that's me. That's the thing that you call me. I am more than an analyst. Now there's a word for it, or I'm different from an analyst, not more than. Having something that you can identify with and feel like you understand how to best play to your strengths rather than feeling like you're limited by something you don't do is super, super powerful.
Can I jump in, Gillian, with a quick one? I host a podcast called The Right Track, where I talk to product leaders and engineering leaders and data leaders about data culture and how to build up their data culture. So I'm really intrigued by this. And I always ask them about their org structure and who reports to who. And it's quite diverse. It's really diverse what this org structure looks like. And obviously we turn this into a conversation about the hybrid model versus the decentralized model versus the centralized data team, all that stuff, but I won't go there. But one of the things that I went into when I was talking to Maura Church, for example, which is the director of data science at Patreon, was this interest gatekeeping of the titles as well. And I think what you just mentioned, like Caitlin, and backdrop Barr, like I'm just an analyst. There is this really weird, almost like a caste system of titles within the data space, and like data scientists want to call themselves data scientists rather than analysts because it's maybe cooler and will give them access to more machine learning. But at the same time, you are maybe more interested in analytics, and analytics is really important. It needs a lot of thoughtful business work. And I think this conversation about why is it somehow more prestigious to be a machine learning engineer or a data scientist than being an analyst is it's a question that we should be asking ourselves, because I think it's a really important job to be done, is bridging the gap between the product engineers and the business side of things, really.
Thanks, Steph. I think that's a great opportunity where, as we're coming close on time here, I want to give everyone a chance to answer a final question around if we consider that crisis originates from the Greek word to decide and defines a turning point, a stage in a sequence of events at which the trend of all the future events is determined. For in this moment now, it sounds like it's possible that this moment we're all experiencing can turn out in our favors. So I'm wondering to all of you panelists, what does a good outcome look like here?
I can go ahead and say, share some thoughts on that. I think the last couple of years has definitely been a crisis or a deciding moment for many of us with the pandemic, and has alters our lives and many other sort of social events along the way. And I think for companies and for folks in data, it was also a defining moment, if you will. I remember at the start of the pandemic, I wasn't even sure what's going to happen to the data industry. I was literally like, what is going to happen? What's going to happen? Like, are we going to have a job tomorrow? What's going to happen? And actually fast forward to today, I think the data industry has never been stronger, whether that's with, the explosion of amazing people like this panel who have strong opinions and are leading teams, or practitioners influencing decisions, whether it's amazing companies who changing lives and doing really well and giving many people opportunities. So I'd like to hope or to think that sort of these crises, there's a silver lining to it. And actually at Monte Carlo, at our company, we often talk about how we are fortunate. We earn the right to solve problems. So if we're really lucky, we will have many more problems to solve. And there's actually a thrill in being able to be handed a problem or be faced with a problem or a big challenge and overcome it. And it's that process that actually makes us, as a company, think about this as like we have each function, and every time sort of one function pulls forward and makes a big sort of breakthrough moment, then everyone else needs to catch up with that function, for example. And as a data team, sometimes we'll make an advancement in some area. Maybe we made a breakthrough with the marketing function, and we've actually came up with some ways to empower them in a self-serve way. And now we've got to figure out how to do it to the rest of the company. And so every sort of crisis, if you will, or every challenge like that actually brings us closer to this North Star, this elusive North Star that we don't know what it is, and we haven't figured it out, but it is. And in a way, would actually like to be grateful for our chance, for our ability to earn the right to solve these. And I hope we'll have more of those and more opportunities to improve.
Awesome, Barr. I love the earn the right to solve problems. I relate to it. I have this thing where when you're growing, it's painful. So you should enjoy when it is painful because it confirms to you that you're growing. And then just this morning, I was on a call about a customer that's going through onboarding, and they are like pushing our boundaries, and our perspective is they are pushing our boundaries. That is fantastic because this will make the onboarding of our next customer better. I agree. Like, I think crises can lead to something great, and I think it's obvious that there is something really cool happening. I assume you're talking about. I assume you're talking about the data space. Maybe you're just talking about the world, Jillian. I don't know.
No, for once, I'm keeping it tight, just the data space.
I think it's obvious that something huge is changing here, and like to see the shift in all of the plumbing that is being built so that we can build really cool stuff around the world and finally empower people to make good decisions ultimately and fast, I think is really exciting, and remove a lot of the grunt work that many people enjoy, but most people are excited about the outcomes that they're trying to create, and we're all empowering them to do that.
Thank you. Caitlin, David, quickly, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I'm an eternal optimist. I think it's every crisis leads you to somewhere that you wouldn't have been, and hopefully you can find a way to see that as a better place. But I think it's not even really a debate here. You know, Steph used the word empower, which is like the core of what is happening in the data space. You're empowering really smart people to do things they never thought were possible, and you're empowering them to not do things that they don't want to do over and over again in a repetitive and not helpful way. And so what we can unlock with this massive new sort of level of creation and ability to build things is not yet certain, but I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, just briefly, I think I'm very optimistic about it. I think we've come a long way, even in the last 3 years, in having clearer identities to take hold of that we didn't have before. I feel like it's come a long way, and we're maybe nearly there, but maybe not.
Yes, it's hard to tell. That's what I'm always trying to figure out. Where are we on this wave spectrum? It does feel like we're coming to a point though, and it feels like a good one.